Welcome back to the channel. We're going over the SP 500, the Nasdaq 100, exactly how you're moving on the stock market, everything that happened into today. You have a 3-day weekend and what is going to happen come Tuesday morning with the market. Everything you need to know. Let's get into it. Now, before we do that, I have to ask you to do two things. Consider liking and consider subscribing. Every single day, I am giving you the content that you need to go over the market and everything so you're not blindsided going into the next trading day. Let's get right into it. First, we're going to go over our futures. We're going to do a little bit of Bitcoin stuff here at the end of the video as well, so stay tuned. Now, as we get in here, I'm going to cover a few stocks, actually. I am going to cover a few stocks in this video, but I want to talk about a few things that are happening. Now, what I point out here, just stick with me. So you have a nice bearish pennant formed right now, but I want to highlight what happened the last time we had this 3-day weekend. If you remember, it was very recently. You had it back here. This is our last weekend we had, June 19th with Juneteenth. Everyone remembers this weekend. Everyone remembers how we moved. It was a really nice push up, and then this week pushed us right back down into the trenches. Here we are. So coming out, you're going to see this movement probably open up around right here. Going into Monday morning. Monday morning futures will be open globally. They just won't be open here in the United States, so we'll still see some movement going on there. But I want to just overall view of what's happening. Now, a lot of people are saying, you know, high chance we see a lot of dipping going into this movement, right? And I don't want to overstretch anything. But in my opinion, I feel like there is downside based on some of this data and based on things happening globally. And we're going to get into that right now. Okay, so I'm going to try to go through this really quickly. This is probably the boring part of the video, so stay with me. There's 3 things we need to talk about. Number 1, the Atlanta Fed near the end of the day came out and revised their GDP growth estimates for Q2. Now, you do know there's a thesis that goes out there that if there are 2 back-to-back quarters of negative GDP growth, you are theoretically in a recession. This is known. This is a thesis. This is not, foolproof, but this is a large, they taught me this personally when I was in school for finance. But now you're also seeing this really be pushed out by CNBC, other the big brands and big names as well. Now, they changed their forecast from, I believe it was negative 1.5, so they already expected negative growth, but they changed it even worse to negative 2.1, which is really bad. It's important to know from this news, you actually ended up going up on the market, which we're going to get into here in a second. Number 2, I want to talk about Europe inflation. This was from this morning. So this is them from June. In June, they announced that their inflation was hitting about 8.1%. This article was actually released in the mid-June, right before Juneteenth, all things considered. So right before, we had that nice run up, a week ago, they released this article, boom, 8.1%. They're at, they're rising inflation, boom, boom, boom. And then 2 weeks later, they get some new data and you've rose 0.5% at the end of June going into July. This was announced here at the end of the day as well, like about beginning of the day. This was announced. You rose again. So in Europe currently, they're facing major inflation problems. It's worth mentioning right now, America's is at 8.7%. So we're actually worse than them based on our last numbers. That's worth mentioning. So the whole world right now is facing a very similar issue to us. Inflation, inflation, inflation. Now, the United States, how can we start to forecast what's happening? How can we start to forecast what's going on? Go to PMI data. If we go to PMI data, what I really want to highlight, now you can see the data from today. I'm sorry, this is kind of zoomed in. Let me zoom out a little bit more. You can see we missed. This going down is bad. This means that there's less manufacturing, less purchases, which is technically worse for the economy. That means that the demand is decreasing, spending is decreasing, okay? So if companies are making less, spending is going down. We're going to talk about this more here in a second as well. So going in June, you actually had a good PMI. It actually rose a beat. It was pretty surprising, and you had a great June. You actually had a decent little bounce in June, and end of June, obviously, you have a little bit more of a dip coming, right? Now, if we see where this trend really started, in January, yeah, you kind of started having some bad, but then you kind of perked back up in, March, and then boom, when that big dip happened in April, I call it the second drop from, the Ukraine issue, you started seeing that missing once again, and this is where you missed once again here by almost 2 points here. So you're seeing inflation, you're seeing the slowdown in the market, even though people were saying, jobs are strong, spending is strong, the consumer is strong. Manufacturing is decreasing. I'm just pointing out the facts. Do with this as you will. These are just the facts. Now, as you go back to the chart, I want to, highlight. This is where you had that first Europe inflation numbers about right here. It ended up going up, over the next few days. Really interesting stuff. Going into here, another 3-day weekend going into next week. How do you play out here? It's worth mentioning. The bear pennant, typically you get that downside movement, right? You're getting that push up. Let's see what happens going into next week. Now, what I will say is if we look at some of the big indicators we've been watching, for instance, junk bonds, things like that, on the day, they had decent days. Junk bonds actually never went negative on the day. That's worth mentioning. Yields, how did they respond today? Again, they got beat up in the beginning of the day. These are all interesting variables. DXY, the dollar value, got hit near the end of the day as well. Had a really strong open, came back down, but you still worth mentioning. People were saying DXY was bearish. Spoiler alert, you were not bearish. You ended up almost hitting new highs today. That's worth mentioning. So DXY is still very bullish. The dollar is very strong. Dollar being strong typically means US stocks tend to go down. Just food for thought, take into account. That's what I'm looking at there. So we have a lot of interesting things going on here. Now, I want to show you guys something that I said specifically here in Discord. Now, Discord, I had one trade on the day. I ended up getting some metas early in the morning. These ran from like 65 cents to $1. I wanted more, which is kind of crazy. I wanted more gains here. I didn't want to take almost, it was like almost 80%. I was like, I'd buy up these almost up to 75 cents if I had to. They hit $1, and I ended up holding them, ended up cutting later on. Crappy. Me just being kind of greedy. What I want to mention here, though, is what I was telling Discord throughout the day. This was the chart I was watching, right? So you were kind of hitting this level at 11.5 on Nasdaq, and you would get rejected back down to about 11.4. And we'll look at this chart here in a second. But this was the highs. I didn't see you breaking highs. I didn't see you breaking lows either. Me and Jay were talking about this throughout the day. You have a 3-day weekend. We just didn't see that happening. It was unlikely, right? So getting more upside into the weekend was just more likely. And again, we said that. We talked about this is why we didn't want to trade. We just stopped trading. We didn't want to do anything with this. We kind of took a day off. Now, going into this, again, we're looking at the Nasdaq. We're going to go to the 5-minute chart really quick so you can see what happened on the day and kind of what happened here. And you can see you trended in this area. Really, for the majority bulk of the day, you stayed in this range right here. You stayed hitting 11.5, getting rejected back down to 11.43, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And today you had a breakout pushing the upside. Kind of interesting there. Again, we didn't expect downside pressure going into a 3-day weekend. Unlikely. Also, beginning of the month, very interesting as well. Now, what I want to highlight here, is going over like something like Bookmap. This was extremely interesting. So today, again, we had a little bit of actual decent buying when it comes to icebergs. We mentioned yesterday there was nothing but sell orders all day long, which made us pretty certain we were going to get some downside. And then as you look into today, you're seeing your CVD, which is your volume, trend all day to the upside, right? And what I want to say here too is basically to the end of the day, in my opinion, is when all that volume kicked in. You had a lot of volume near the end of the day, about the last hour of trading. But until then, in my opinion, there just wasn't that much. So you're seeing this slowly climb up. And you saw some bigger iceberg orders kicking in here as well. That was interesting, right? Nothing of this compares to yesterday's downside movement that we had. There was a lot of selling going on. So looking at that, it led me to the thesis of just not to trade for the day when we're looking at futures, because you had buyers stepping in, but volume was lackluster to say the least, and it actually flipped back down to negative by the end of the day, even though you ended to the upside. So let that sink in. Even though you ended at these peaks, volume stayed in favor to the bears, which shows me most likely there was some shorting going on here. Now, if we go to the options flow, this is where things continue to pique my interest, right? We come in here, SPY puts. You can see this back. We talked about this previous 2 days. We talked about how SPY calls were finally starting to dominate and the market started going down. This is interesting that SPY calls are down once again. Puts are definitely dominating here. As we go over to Qs, there's heavy betting on tech going up. Again, when we went to Juneteenth, it's worth mentioning you had a lot of puts across the market. This time around, going into 4th of July, you have a decent amount of calls on more risky assets such as tech. Going over to VIX. VIX, we have to talk about this as well. Lots of calls coming in here, betting on more volatility. As we look at VIX, you saw this. This was my favorite part of the day probably, and describes the day perfectly. You saw an instantaneous spike up here on VIX from 27 all the way to 28.8 and then come right back down. I've checked on TOS. That's where I do most of my trading in Interactive Brokers. Interactive Brokers link is down below if you're interested. Just check them out. But looking at this, again, you saw it spike right back down, which just showed me there was just so much going on with the market today, and it just verified my reason not to trade. In my opinion, I think we are queued up for a very big movement when it comes to indexes based on some of this price action that we're getting as a whole and how VIX is trending. VIX is coming right back down to that key level, which we've been getting a lot of movement from as well. This is very, very interesting when it comes to a broader perspective of a big move that's most likely coming this coming week. So in my opinion, I think we will have some downside. I'm anticipating downside for all the reasons that I mentioned up top. These are very big reasons why I expect downside. Now I'm going to get to some charts and I'm going to show you my opinion there and kind of some things that are verifying my opinion there as a whole, which we'll get to. But looking at this, I do expect some downside. However, I always have to say, however, where my stops are, where I flip my bias, how I become a quote unquote bull if I'm looking at the market. If you get above 11.7, you are bullish, okay? Just no matter what, just know that. If stocks start getting below 11.6 on the Nasdaq, you are bullish, and I'd be targeting immediately back to 12,000. So if you get above this region, I got to keep saying it very, very clear. You are targeting this area up here, about 11.95 all the way to 12 flat. That's where you're targeting a nice 300-point move on the Nasdaq. That's what you got to be looking for. There's nothing else. You get above 11.7, boom, you're a bull. As long as you're below 11.7, I am looking for downside. Nothing will change my mind as long as you're below 11.7. And when I say downside, I am anticipating new lows to be made. I'm anticipating downside, downside, downside. You're already very close to that region, which is right here at roughly 11.07. You're very close, only about, at the lows, you were about 300 points away. Right now, you're about 600 points away, so I still see a lot of movement here in the works. And if you're looking at this movement, you saw this climb back up and then boom, shot right back down. The volume is there as well. It's starting to kick back in, starting to flow back into play here. So when we look at ES, the same thing is happening here. You're very close, about 200 points away. Now, I would say ES had a little bit better of a day than Nasdaq. He started breaking some key ranges, but ultimately you're testing those same levels we were talking about on the previous day. So nothing, in my opinion, had a breakout, right? Nothing, in my opinion, had a key breakout. Looking at SPY, same retest. My opinion, still bearish. It's all in those same levels. Again, you get back above these key levels, that's what you're looking at. Now for stocks, because this is where everyone's here, this is what everyone's looking for. Now, when we look at these stocks, in my opinion, this is going to clarify some of the quote unquote bearish tendencies I see in the market. Number one, we're going to look at Facebook. Now, Facebook is automatically going to be one of the weaker stocks just because of the data they released. If you don't know, basically Facebook says their outlook is terrible. They're anticipating downside. They're anticipating little to no growth. Looking at Facebook right now, you had a double bottom almost today of those previous lows, about 154. You actually kind of broke, I believe, those lows down here for a little bit, coming down right now. You're coming back up for the retest. I anticipate more downside. Targets roughly about 140 on the downside there. I could see more downside coming as well, but you're looking for 140, 139, and then from there, probably the lows of about 123. From here as well, looking at something like AMD. This is my favorite play that there is. I've been posting on Twitter. This is definitely the play of plays that I love. If we're looking at this level, you're coming all the way back to July 2020. This is your pre-COVID lows right here, pre-COVID highs right here. Going into this, you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is your fifth touch. Now, typically looking at this, you don't want to get in on the first touch. You kind of want to wait to break below. In my opinion, we're going to get to here in a second. Look at this gap. You already have gaps all back here as well. I'm not a huge gap trader, but looking at this on the daily, these will most likely get filled very quickly. Once you have about 71 all the way down to 69.5. Looking here as well, another one down here as well. Locally, $64 right there. Food for thought though. Micron had earnings today. They did not perform well. Did they beat? Yes, but their outlook is very bad. Consumer spending in the United States has dropped by roughly 5% over this last quarter, and they're anticipating less spending as inflation ramps up, as a recession, quote unquote, gets closer and closer, because people say we're not in a recession as we speak. Micron's already hitting all these levels as well, filling all those gaps all the way. Looking at the beloved NVIDIA. This is one of the plays we've been talking about for a long time as well here on the channel. We're going back. Look at some of these gaps. The gap right there. You started filling that one today at 147. So these are just some of the plays that I'm currently looking at. These are ones that are getting me excited. As well, we're going over to John Deere. We mentioned this one a few days ago. Remember, we said you break 307, it's a wraps. You broke 308, 307, boom, back down. Broke it again here 2 days ago. Went from 308 all the way back down, double bottom. Most likely you're going to start breaking this level. Looking at Caterpillar. Same type of action. A lot of these are losing key levels. The strongest stocks that I'm seeing in the market right now are Apple and Microsoft and Amazon. Those are the only strong stocks that I'm really seeing in the market. Apple trying to hold up. Microsoft trying to hold up. Those are the best performers that there are right now. They're holding their value, etc. Amazon, as we come in here, this might be the most bullish chart that there is right now. an obvious head and shoulders. And I don't like head and shoulders, but it's the best that there is right now. You can obviously see that price action, how you're holding between 102 and 101 clearly, trying to get that balance up. So if there's anything that I'm hedging for upside protection, it's Amazon, it's Apple, it's Microsoft. Those are your safer bets right now. If you want that upside, if you think we're bullish, those are the ones that I would have to be betting on. And if you look here on Amazon, you have a very nice level going into here as well, all the way back to 143. So these are definitely stocks you got to be keeping on your watch list and make sure you're paying attention to, because these could easily start running. So, but these are some of the stronger ones. Again, I see weakness in the market, and so I'm carefully watching this as well. Look at something like Google. Has a split coming up very soon, but look how weak it's been. Look at how it's been dropping. You're making some of these same patterns that we saw from Amazon, Google, Tesla. These are some of the same patterns we saw when they had those big drops. So you're definitely seeing a lot of that spike down and that drawdown coming in here. You start to break, you even see a double bottom of 2050. So you got to be paying attention to all these plays. These are some of the stocks that I'm liking. Now, I said I'll talk about Bitcoin before I let you out of here. That's what we're going to do. Bitcoin USD, this is what we're looking at really quick. Looking at Bitcoin going to the 4-hour chart. This is my opinion. Again, I personally thought when you started bouncing back up, you were going to get a test of maybe 23 to 24K. This was kind of the range that I was watching about here to locally here. You did not. You really got nothing. I thought you would get something else. You just did not get that level, right? You got rejected at locally 21.5, pushed down. A lot of weakness here, guys. A lot of weakness on this chart. If I'm looking at crypto, you're seeing all these cryptos going under. Celsius, Luna, you're seeing Tether rumors are going under. You're seeing Voyager losing money. Voyager, I think, was down 23% on the day. There is weakness in the broad market of crypto as well. I'm anticipating breaking of lows or a retest of lows very soon. I'm not going to give a specific time frame, but I see a break in of these lows very soon, within 2 weeks roughly, coming down possibly even this weekend, depending on the weakness in the market. From there, you know my target. I've talked about this a lot. I'm targeting locally 13 to 14K. That's your next big zone, your next big support. We anticipated as well. This range right here would be a resistance, a support. We anticipated basically 19.3 all the way down to locally about 17.6 is going to be your range of support. That's where you found that support. I anticipate once you get below 17.6, it's almost a clear run down 13, 14K. That's it for me. Consider liking, consider subscribing. More content is coming. Have a good one, traders.